Yeah, so if anyone has questions that have popped up, we've answered quite a few here in the chat, but if there's other questions, please go ahead and ask them now. So one question that came up is if you could show how to add attribute fields to that quick view, like set up that quick view window.
Yeah, so whether you're in a list or in the network editor or in the quick view, you're always going to see this little button that looks like a white box with like, I think that's supposed to be a screwdriver next to it. If you click that little button on any of these windows, that's where you can click and add attributes. So for example, if we're looking at a zone and you want to add some zone data to quickly update this zone, you can click this in the quick view. There is this white box with the screwdriver, and then it gives you the attribute selection window. And you can just find what attribute you want. You know, if I'm looking for K-12, enrollment right there, and then you just double click on it to move it, or you can use these green arrows to move it over. Employment data, right? So we have, different types of employment data that we can add. And this will update this quick view window so that you don't have to like find it in the list or anything like that. Now, if you want to multi-edit, what you can do is you can hold control down. So if you hold the control key and then left click on multiple zones, those will all be editable via the quick view. Now you see some of them have these little stars, and that's because these 3 zones have different values in these cells. So for example, they all have 0 K-12 enrollment, but they each have different total employment data. So you could go through and name them all or update them all. So for example, I want to just write test. So now that's mass edited these 3 zones together, right? And so by holding control, you can control click and you can select multiple zones and also edit them in the quick view. But yeah, the quick view is a quick and easy way to update different values of data and things. For sure.
Okay. Let me see. So one, I'll just answer real quick. Is there an option for reversible lanes? Yes, there is. There is a user-defined attribute that flags those as reversible lanes, and that gets updated during the assignment to update the speeding capacity. It's, I think, dir code there. Yep. So that's how that gets treated. One other thing that came up was a couple of people asked about importing shapefiles. So can you just walk through that real quick?
Yeah. So the import for a shapefile is pretty straightforward. Various shapefiles are going to have different attributes and things within them. So real quick, let me just do this. I'm going to do a file export shapefile, and I'm going to say test just real quick. And I'm going to export the zones as a shapefile, just so we have a shapefile to use. Then I'm going to open up a new version. I'm going to hit save yes. Cancel. Let me hit new. I'm not going to save. There we go. So let's say we have a new Visum and you wanted to import a shapefile of zones that you got maybe from another Visum file or from somewhere else. You go File, Import, Shapefile, and then you find that shapefile that you want to import. So again, sorry, I think it was a little laggy. So File, Import, Shapefile. And then you find whatever shapefile you want to import and you can click Open. Now, when you bring this in, since this shapefile has like geometric shapes and things to it, it'll read it in, and you can read it in as a zone or a point of interest or territories or something like that. If there's if there's just single points everywhere, you'll also have the ability to import it as nodes or zone centroids. Or if there's lines, you can import them as routes or links and things like that. So depending on what is in the shapefile, you'll have different options in this drop-down menu. And since I did polygons, it's going to say, okay, do you want to read these in as zones or something like that? So you'll select zones, and then you can click OK. It'll take a second, and it's reading that shapefile, but it should build out those zones. It should be fairly quick, although there was a lot of zones. So we'll see what happens. Oh no, actually, sorry, there is a second window that popped up. Now that shapefile, when I exported it, it pulled out all of those UDAs and things that came with the zones, and it put it into the shapefile. So your shapefile might come with a bunch of different attributes that aren't default in Visum, and that's okay, because it'll list it here and says, what do you want to do with them? And then you can say, create UDAs for all source attributes not allocated yet. So you just click generate, and it'll automatically pull the name of that attribute that's in the shapefile, and it'll assign it a name here. And then you can go through and maybe change the data type and things like that if you need to. And then you just click OK, and then it'll just import the shapefile like that. So it's actually fairly quick and easy to do. With shapefiles to do that. And again, if it's like a line or a dot, you'll have different options other than polygons. So you can also import nodes or public transit stops, or you can import link shapes and things like that.
Okay. Let's see. There was a question regarding the runtime and how many iterations there were. So I can just tell you that there were 7 iterations of distribution and mode choice. So it's the same as the existing queue model. So there was no change there. And let's see. Sorry, just trying to read through these questions real quick. Here's one relating to how bus and BRT are coded in a network. I guess, are you going to handle that tomorrow, or do you want to just give an idea how you would code something like that now?
I can give a quick overview on what it looks like, but basically you have an option as to whether or not you want them to be run on the same links as the general traffic, or if BRT is going to have its own specialized lanes and things like that. So let me open up, because I created a new file here. Let me just reopen that 2015 model. So if you have something like a BRT running on the highway that maybe has its own lane or something like that, a lot of times what people do is they'll just code it as a parallel link system. So that way it's unimpeded by the other traffic, right? And so in that case, that's how I believe it's done in this one. Maybe Chayton can give a little bit more detail, but is the BRT its own link system, Chayton, or is it in with the link with the general traffic and stuff like that?
Yeah, it can be either way, depending on how. Only thing is over here we model that as a sub mode. Things are the only, so if you go for demand, just click demand over here, up in the next to that network, it's a network demand scripts. We only show the setup of where that thesis is defined. So command, Yeah, so over here where it says TSYS, you can see that there are different transport systems defined here, which are kind of consistent with what the current model has. So it's built basically with interactive editing, which Levi will show you tomorrow in more detail. But prior to that, we have the transport systems which correspond to the submodes in the model already defined here. If it were a new model, you'd find these from scratch, but this model just adopts it from the existing D7 model structure. So you would just basically flag that line as a BRT transport system and then build the line route. So, and the detail for that line route coding is tomorrow. Yeah, so we'll have a look at that in more detail tomorrow.
Yep. And then as far as what facilities they're allowed to use, it'll be, at the link level or at the turn level, you can allow or disallow different modes from using it, transportation systems from using it here. So yeah.
Okay. So another question was around how you might be able to aggregate results from multiple zones. So let's say you
Okay.
want to create districts or groups of zones to aggregate those results up. Is that something you could show?
There's a couple ways you can do it. You can kind of soft code it in the sense that like you can look at different lists of zones and you can filter those. So if I go into the zones list, you can obviously filter the zones by certain numbers or something like that. And then you can aggregate that filtered list directly here. So we can show, sums, and then we can filter by specific attributes. That's not physically creating a connection between the zones. That's just kind of post-processing the data. But you could always create things like main zones and territories, which are other polygons that would lie on top of the existing turn or zone polygons that could encompass multiple zones within each other. So, for example, if you wanted to split up a zone and have some internal trips going between subzones within there, you could always use like a main zone to do that. The simpler way would be to just create a user-defined attribute and then flag all of the zones that are grouped together in some way with that user-defined attribute, right? And say, so, parent ID or something like that. And then that way you don't have to have like a physical object do it. But if you wanted physical objects to group them together, you could either delete the zone and merge it with nearby zones, or you can create an object called a main zone, which sits over the top. And so here's a main zone, for example, sitting over the top of a bunch of little zones, right? So if I deactivate nodes and links and I turn on our zones, we have all these zones sitting within this larger main zone. And this main zone can be evaluated just the same as any of the zones list, right? So you can pull similar attributes out of the main zone as well as and then we have larger territories beyond that. So here's a territory, and then here's a main zone within that territory, right? So you can have different levels of detail within your model and then hard code that and aggregate that together. So we already have some structure for that, but if you wanted to subdivide your zones up a little bit more, you could always do that as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question, real quick that I can take. Someone asked about, I don't know if you can show in that quick view the control type for a node. They were coming up as unknown, and they asked if that would impact the assignment. In the case of a static assignment like this is not going to affect that at all. But if you were doing something like a meso, like simulation-based assignment, then that would matter. But for the purposes of a model like this, it wouldn't affect the assignment. And you wouldn't need to code any kind of like signal timings, anything like that, are not going to be reflected in this particular assignment. And one more thing, hopefully this is what you're asking. I'm not 100% sure, but can you walk through like displaying, for example, one example is the number of lanes in the network editor, like add that label to the links?
Yeah, so let me deactivate zones and I'll activate the links object. So here we see the links in the network, don't need the points of interest. So right now the links don't have any labels assigned to them, but if we go into the links graphic parameters and we go to display, right now we have uniform display and things like that. We can also activate labels just like we could do bars and stuff like that. So you can come into there and then there's a label section and you can define what attribute the label is displaying. So for example, if you wanted number of lanes, I think is it number of lanes, there we go, right there, preview. And so you could visualize it that way. A little bit less messy of a way to do it instead of a label might be using color scheme and just color the links based on the number of lanes, because it's a little bit easier to see visually, because for example, if we do this and zoom out, some of them are going to be visually turned off, so there's less clutter. So you'd have to actually zoom in kind of far to get a decent view of it. But that's one way you can do it, or that's how you would activate the labels. Is you'd come into, you right click on links, go to graphic parameters, and you can go straight to labels. And then once you select labels, you just need to make sure that you have the draw object turned on, and then you can select what attribute you want to be in that label. And then you can also define the label, like what size is it, what font do you want to use, what color is the label using, things like that.
And I believe this is possible. They're asking if you can also do the volume, so display two of those attributes together.
As two individual labels.
Or on the same label even. I think if you do maybe like table over there on the left instead of.
Oh yeah. As a table, you can define multiple. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can add multiple attributes to this like table and display it. So
yeah.
Great. Are you able to do directional labels? So if you have, will it show a separate label for each direction?
Yeah, there's a way to do it. I know how to do it for bars. I'm trying to remember how to do it specifically for labels. You could probably just do it in the bars section, because the bars you can also have a label included. So you can do bar labels, but not draw the bars. So for example, let me turn off the link label itself, preview. So for example, if I do link bars and I'm gonna say, instead of yellow, because it's hard, you can't really see it, I'm gonna do like a black, or I'll do like a dark blue. Click OK. So we have this PRT link bar, right? Which right now is based on volume, right? But you can do directional labels. And if you're zoomed in far enough, if they're not conflicting with each other, it will show labels going in each direction. So for example, here we have the volume. And so you can have this link bar based on whatever attribute you want. So for example, number of lanes, right? I can pick number of lanes for the bar and click OK. It'll show the number of lanes in each direction as well.
Okay. Let's see. One quick thing. Are you able to show desire lines real quick?
Yeah. There's a lot of them, so it's thinking.
And
Okay.
while that's thinking, let me see if there's something I can answer real quick. There's a question, what type of assignment? So for transit's a headway-based assignment, and for private vehicles, it's a biconjugate Frank Wolf assignment.
Yeah, so here's how you would, we can see some of them here. The problem is we don't have like too many model runs in this one because it's been emptied out. But here are the desired lines. Yeah.
Okay.
But you can edit the graphic parameters of them, just like with the link bar. You'd pick which attribute you want the desired line to be scaled on, and then you could go from there. So, for example, if we did direct distance, we'd be able to see what they look like with some weight